Welcome to night 2 of our Kwanzaa 2021 celebration. Habara Gani, what is the word? On the second day of Kwanzaa, the second principle is Kuji Jakalia, the Swahili word for self-determination, to define and name ourselves as well as speak for ourselves. Tonight, our presenter is one of International Civil Rights Center and Museum's very own Cassandra Williams, who is the Director of Tour Guides and Interpretive Staff and Educational Program Coordinator here at the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. Ms. Williams is a phenomenal actor and director. She has performed at Triad Stage, Cape Fear, Regional Theater, Black Repertory Company, Touring Theater of North Carolina, portraying Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. She is a former theater teacher for Guilford County Schools, and Ms. Williams is also a minister and ordained elder. Her most recent work, she has directed Black Nativity. The International Civil Rights Center and Museum is proud to present Ms. Cassandra Williams, speaking on the principle of Kuji Jakalia, self-determination.
Happy Kwanzaa to African people everywhere throughout the global African community. Kwanzaa is a celebration of family, community, and culture. We are reminded by Kwanzaa's founder, Dr. Karenga, that Kwanzaa is a special season and celebration of our sacred and expansive selves as African people. It is a unique time of remembrance, reflection, reaffirmation, and recommitment. It is a special and unique time to remember and honor our ancestors, to reflect on what it means to be African and human in the most expansive and meaningful sense, and to reaffirm the sacred beauty and goodness of ourselves and our rightfulness of our relentless struggle to be ourselves and free ourselves and contribute to an ever-expanding realm of freedom, justice, and caring in the world. Kwanzaa is a special and unique time and space to recommit ourselves to our highest values that teach us to live our lives, do our work, and wage our struggles in dignity-affirming, life-enhancing, and world-preserving ways as we continue forward in the upward paths of our honored ancestors. The second principle we celebrate today is Kuji Jakalia, self-determination. It means to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. Kuji Jakalia teaches us we must think and act for ourselves and define ourselves by the good we choose and do in the world. It speaks to our right and responsibility to be ourselves and free ourselves and make our own unique contribution to the reimagining and remaking of our societies and the world. And Kuji Jakalia stresses our moral obligation to reaffirm and support this right for others, especially those oppressed and struggling for freedom, those wronged and injured and struggling for justice, and those disempowered and struggling for power over their destinies and their lives. The principle of Kuji Jakalia also expresses itself as both commitment and practice. It demands that we as an African people define, defend, and develop ourselves instead of allowing or encouraging others to do this. It requires that we recover lost memory and once again shape our world in our own image and interests. Yes, it is a call to recover and speak our own special cultural truth to the world and make our own unique contribution. We also define our identity through commitment and practice. The first act of a free people is to shape its world in its own image and interests. It is a statement about their conception of self and commitment to self-determination. Kwanzaa, built on the teachings of Frantz Fanon, states that each person must ask himself or herself three basic questions. Who am I? Am I really who I am? And am I all I ought to be? These questions of history and culture are not simply questions of personal identity. They are questions of collective identity based on and born out in historical and cultural practice. And the essential quality of that practice must be the quality of self-determination. Lisa Nichols is one of the world's most requested motivational speakers, as well as a media personality and corporate CEO. Her global platform has reached and served nearly 80 million people. She expresses self-determination in this manner. You are the designer of your destiny. You are the author of your story. From a struggling single mother on public assistance to a millionaire entrepreneur, Lisa's courage and determination have inspired people worldwide and helped countless audiences break through to discover their own untapped talents and infinite potential. To answer that question of who am I correctly, then, is to know and live one's history and practice one's culture. To answer the question of am I really who I am is to have and employ a cultural criteria of authenticity, in essence, a criteria of what is real or unreal, what is appearance or essence, what is culturally rooted or foreign. And to answer the question of am I all I ought to be is to self-consciously possess and use ethical and cultural standards which measure men, women, and even children in terms of the quality of their thought and practice in the context of who they are and must become in both an African and a human sense. The official Kwanzaa celebration reminds us that the principle of self-determination carries within it the assumption that we have both the right and responsibility to exist as a people and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history. It urges us as a people not to surrender our historical and cultural identity to fit into the culture of another. The principle and practice of self-determination expresses and supports the concept and practice of Afrocentricity. According to Ashanti in the Afrocentric ideal, Afrocentricity is a quality of thought and practice which is rooted in the cultural image and human interests of African people. To say that a perspective or approach is in an African cultural image is to say it's rooted in an African value system and worldview, especially in the historical and cultural sense. And to say that an approach or perspective is in the human interest of African people is to say that it is supportive of the just claims. African people have and share with other humans freedom from want, toil and frustration, domination, freedom to fully realize themselves in their human and African cultures. Ashanti further affirms that Afrocentricity does not seek or deny or deform others' history and humanity, but to affirm, rescue, and reconstruct its own after the Holocaust of enslavement and various other forms of oppression. Afrocentricity at its cultural best is an ongoing quest for historical and cultural anchor, a foundation on which we raise our cultural future, ground our cultural production, and measure their authenticity and value. Afrocentricity is an ongoing critical reconstructed directed toward restoring lost and missing parts of our historical self-formation or development as a people. He further asserts that Afrocentricity, as the core and fundamental liberty of our self-determination, reaffirms our right and responsibility to exist as a people, to speak our own special truth to the world, and to make our own contribution to the forward flow of human history. To do the opposite is immoral. To do less is dishonorable and ultimately self-destructive. As we reflect on that second principle, Kujichagulia, I want to share a poem written by Nikki Giovanni titled Rosa Parks from her book of poetry, Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea. Rosa Parks. This is for the Pullman porters who organized when people said they couldn't, and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to the Black Americans in the South so they would know they were not alone. This is for the Pullman porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight that resulted in Brown v. the Board of Education. Because even though Kansas is west, and even though Topeka is the birthplace of Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote the powerful, "The Chicago Defender Sends a Man to Little Rock," it is the Pullman porters who whispered to the traveling men, both the blues men and the race men, so that they both would know what was going on. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled as if they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled and welcomed a 14-year-old boy onto their train in 1955. They noticed his slight limp that he tried to disguise with a doo-wop walk. They noticed his stutter and probably understood why his mother wanted him out of Chicago during the summer when school was out. 14-year-old Black boys with limps and stutters are apt to try to prove themselves in dangerous ways when mothers aren't around to look after them. So this is for the Pullman porters who looked over that 14-year-old while the train rolled the reverse of the blues highways from Chicago to St. Louis to Memphis to Mississippi. This is for the men who kept him safe. And if Emmett Till had been able to stay on a train all summer, he would have maybe grown a bit of a paunch, certainly lost his hair, probably have worn bifocals and bounced his grandchildren on his knee, telling them about his summer riding the rails. But he had to get off that train and ended up in Money, Mississippi, and was horribly, brutally, inexcusably, and unacceptably murdered. This is for the Pullman porters who, when the sheriff was trying to get the body secretly buried, got Emmett's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And this is for all the mothers who cried. And this is for all the people who said, "Never again." And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day until the bus driver gave her the opportunity to make history. This is about Mrs. Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama, who was also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, was willing to sacrifice her life so that that young man in Money, Mississippi, who had been so well protected by the Pullman porters, would not have died in vain. When Mrs. Parks said no, a passionate movement was begun. No longer would there be reliance on the law. There was a higher law. When Mrs. Parks brought that light of hers to expose the evil of the system, the sun came and rested on her shoulders, bringing the heat and light of truth. Others would follow Mrs. Parks. 4 young men in Greensboro, North Carolina, would also say no. Great voices would be raised, singing the praises of God and exhorting us to forgive those who trespass against us. But it was the Pullman porters who safely got Emmett to his grand uncle, and it was Mrs. Rosa Parks who could not stand that death. And in not being able to stand it, she sat back down. Our second principle, Kujichagulia, or self-determination, is meant to give strength to the community by its members defining, naming, creating, and speaking for themselves. Giovanni's poem pays homage to some historical figures who have refined the rules and relations of their time. We remember and honor those and others armed with the power of self-determination, Kujichagulia. The 4 freshmen from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College who sat at this lunch counter on February 1st, 1960, and started a sit-in movement. Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, David Richmond, and Ezel Blair Jr. knew they had to be the change they wanted to see, Kujichagulia. Fannie Lou Townsend Hamer rose from humble beginnings in Mississippi to become one of the most important, passionate, and powerful voices of the civil and voting rights movements, and a leader in the efforts for greater economic opportunities for African Americans. Fannie Lou Hamer's statement, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," was not an expression of her physical health, but rather her self-determination to do something for the Black man of the South if it would cost her life. She was determined to become a registered voter and then got everybody in the state of Mississippi registered. Every time she sang, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine," people were reminded that we must exhibit self-determination to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves, Kujichagulia. Shirley Anita Chisholm, an African-American politician, educator, and author. In 1968, she became the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, representing New York's 12th congressional district for 7 terms. In the 1972 United States presidential election, she became the first Black candidate to run for a major party's nomination for president, and the first woman to run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. In her bid for president, her campaign theme proclaimed that she was unbought and unbossed, Kujichagulia. Alexander Murray Palmer Haley was determined to tell the story and the legacy of his family's ancestor, Kunta Kinte. In 1976, Haley published Roots, the Saga of an American Family, a novel based on his family's history. It started with the story of Kunta Kinte, who was kidnapped in the Gambia in 1767 and transported to the province of Maryland to be sold as a slave. Haley asserted he was a seventh-generation descendant of Kunta Kinte, and his work on the novel involved 12 years of research, intercontinental travel, and writing. He went to the village where Kunta Kinte grew up, and he listened to a tribal historian, a griot, tell the story of Kunta Kinte's capture. Haley also traced the records of the ship, the Lord Legionnaire, which he said carried his ancestor to the Americas. Roots, both the book and television miniseries, raised the public awareness of African American history and inspired a broad interest in genealogy and family history. Kujichagulia. In the poem Dreams, Langston Hughes admonishes us, hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. As we light our candle for our second principle, I challenge you to be self-determined. Kujichagulia.